This last week, Kath, somebody came home after a big long day of work, and that somebody was not my husband.
Okay.
Came in and got really, really angry, right? And they
Yeah.
said things, they did things, and completely threw me. And I started to feel angry and hurt. And, do you know that feeling where it feels like literally your heart just got stabbed there and then?
Oh gosh, I'm sorry, Elle. Yeah, I know what you're talking about though, but I'm sorry
Yeah.
that this happened again, well, recently.
Yeah, well, and it was, it was a small little thing, but it's what is interesting to me is that we can have these great relationships with people that we love,
Yeah.
but then in a moment, something can be said and done, and then your heart's feeling stabbed and you're left feeling pretty raw. And it's
Yeah.
just a really interesting, yeah, it was just an interesting moment. So I thought I'm going to bring this to our what's it called? Our podcast conversation today.
Oh, well, thanks first of all for sharing and being vulnerable to share. And as you're sharing, I'm remembering back, and I just think it's actually such a good thing to talk about because it's so real.
Mm,
I think all of us that have got people in our world that we love
yeah.
dearly, it's part of loving, isn't it?
Yes.
When you love and you care, uh, because somebody else that's distant to you might say
The
something
same
along the
thing.
same lines and it
Mhm.
doesn't really impact you.
No. And sometimes it was even the way things were said. And I was like,
Yeah.
what is even going on here? And I started to, that how it starts in your gut and it just starts to fester. And yeah, it wasn't very
Oh,
nice.
goodness me.
But
Oh,
that's the
gosh.
joys, right? Living in a home with other people, and
Yeah,
nothing is perfect, and we are in part of relationship. And yeah, it's very interesting, very interesting
it is
indeed.
interesting. And it's so fascinating that you bring this up because I had someone that I've been working with recently email with actually a very, very similar question.
Okay,
When someone close to you says hurtful stuff.
okay.
Um, and I'm just trying to think. Her question was, how do you not let it impact your energy
Mm,
or your sense of self-worth?
yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So in your case, how was your energy after feeling stabbed in the heart? Oh my gosh.
Well, my energy at the very moment was starting to escalate, and I was feeling very energetic to say some things, but
Yeah.
I but I sort of walked away, and I just sort of had to go, what just happened? What is going on? And I went directly to what could possibly be happening. And so I started to sort of think, okay, this person's been at work, it's been a long day, asking myself all these
Oh,
questions
yeah.
of what's going on in their world, because I guess the behavior was out of character.
Yeah.
We don't typically speak in hurtful, angry ways towards one another. Um, but yeah, so yeah, energy was escalated, but then it kind of I had to walk away and unpack a few things in my head and heart before I even went any further with it, because otherwise I was going to say and do something potentially that I would regret.
And I just love that you share that because that actually just pausing for a moment, my friend, I just
Sure.
want to just say that that takes such wisdom, and I think you're incredible. Just saying that, putting it out there, because I think the easiest thing
Mm,
would be to just say something back, like, I mean, how often do I remember back on moments like that where I've said stuff and the moment it's out, like you want to take it back,
yeah.
but you can't take it back. So, and I also just love that you shared how your mind went to, I wonder what's happening in their world right now. And that takes
Mm,
awareness, the awareness that there's that saying, I'm sure you've heard it before. It's like hurt
her
people, or
people.
hurting people hurt people.
Mm,
And it's not necessarily that whoever this was in your world was like hurting, but
no.
maybe it's frustrating people, like get frustrated with
Yes.
people, or angry people make other people angry, or you
Yeah.
can use that same sort of notion for a lot of things. So I think that question of what's going on in their world
Yeah.
is a really valid question. And I think also depending on the circumstance, sometimes it can be a in the moment thing. Like in
Mm.
your case, it sounds like it was like a in the moment of the day,
Yes.
something happened that was triggering. And yet I've also
I'd tell the
like think
story, but I can tell the person would probably not approve.
yeah, and that's perfect. But I think I think listening, like I'm listening, I can relate completely. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes with my own like kids, maybe there were even seasons in life where seasons
Oh,
were just prickly,
yes.
So sometimes it's yeah, what's happening in the moment in the day, and sometimes it's
Mm,
just the season of hormones or
yes. All of the above. Exactly right.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
But it's hard because we're all flesh and blood, right? And we all have
yeah.
these, and like there's certainly been time, like I look back, having had 5 teenagers through my house and young adults at different stages, there's
Oh
been
yeah,
lots of these moments. And there's been lots
yeah,
of moments where I've set a piece back, because
yeah,
I had stuff going on in my world and I didn't have, whether it was the self-control or the whatever at that time, to zip my lips and have a bit more wisdom or insight about in that moment my emotion took over. So it's just interesting that we all have these moments, um, and we all feel the hurt.
yeah. Well, I think we feel the hurt because I mean, the what you and I are talking about, it's the people closest to us. It's the people in
Yeah.
your world, in your home, in
Yeah.
your life that you love most dearly. And as you were sharing there, I was remembering back to a time long ago when our youngest was, I think he was still in junior school, like late junior school,
Mm.
and so maybe like 11 or 12. And we were driving back from somewhere, and his best friend at the time, they were spending a lot of time with each other,
Yeah.
and he kept going on and on and on about his best friend's mum, and
Mm.
what she would say and what she would cook them for dinner, and what she how she would
This awesome
you know
perfect mum.
this awesome perfect mom. And I remember in that moment just losing it with him and going, well, if you want her as your mum, go for it, like I
I
don't
think
need to
any
be your mum
mums,
anymore.
yeah, and I think any mums tuning in today, hearing that, probably have had a similar, I've done the same with my eldest. He was going on and on. I'm like, just go live there. I'm sure they've got a spare room. If they're so perfect, go live there.
And in that
Yeah,
case, it wasn't really that he like lashed out at me. I think I kind of more lashed out at him because I
yeah,
was feeling this sort of insecurity or whatever it
yeah,
was. So sometimes it's a case of we're on the receiving end of somebody else's um, trigger,
yeah,
and sometimes we're the one that's the trigger. It was being triggered,
yeah, yeah.
So, but nonetheless, what's sad is that hurtful stuff comes out.
Yes, it
Yeah,
does. And I guess
yeah,
what's really would be a really helpful conversation to have today is to go, okay, when we're triggered or someone else is triggered, what can we perhaps do? And what's out of our control that we like, for example, we feel hurt, right?
yeah,
And I think that's if that's just a normal part of the process, of course we feel hurt. If we didn't feel hurt, there would be something wrong with us.
for
So I
sure.
think so it's okay. We're going to feel hurt, but it's what do we do in that hurt? How do
Yeah.
we respond in a way that our relationships can still be um, restored or held and we still have a safe relationship with that person? How do we have maybe some sort of barrier so that we are protecting our heart and it doesn't quite feel like it's being quite so sad, but that we've got a way to handle the situation without it impacting who we are as a person, perhaps, and our
Yeah,
energy levels and all of those things. Because we have to show up, right?
absolutely.
We constantly have to keep showing up in life. So how do
So
we do it?
it I suppose it's how do we navigate through those times in a way that we come out the other end and look back and we can say, I've been who I wanted to be in that moment.
Yeah.
And so often I know I've looked back and I've just thought, shucks, that crazy lady. That's not who I
She
wanted to be.
she raised her head again. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And I think, how many of us
Mm,
have, and I think, it can also be, we could also similarly say, well, it's part of the human race to
mm,
um stumble and lash out at others and
mm.
say hurtful things. But the truth is, we don't have to.
No,
Like we can't control what others say to us, so what's coming
no.
in. So what hurt, as you said, potentially we could um shield ourselves, I suppose,
Mm,
but you'd also don't want to live with a closed heart. So
no.
if you've got an open heart towards those you really love,
Yeah,
and you want to have an open heart and you
yeah.
actually want to feel all the feels,
Mm.
it's a case of, okay, so how do I, yeah, be
How do
who
we
I
do
want to
that?
be in that moment
Mm,
and uh, maintain a sense of, oh, I don't even know what the word is, but it's being aligned to my values and who I want to
mm.
show up being. Because at the end of the day, life is also not perfect, as it doesn't sort of come up in a neatly tied bow that, okay, someone's going to hurt you in the moment when you've got time to feel hurt.
That's right. When you're
Quite
feeling
often,
okay.
yeah, and quite often it's a case of that might happen and you might be on your way out the door to a meeting, or you might need to show up for something else in that moment. And you actually, so how do you maintain uh, who you want to be
Mm,
when out of the blue
mm.
something's happened that you feel
And you're
like you've been
feeling
stabbed in
hurt.
the heart? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think it's really good big questions. And I think straight up to say that we can put a plan in place, knowing that we will likely not get it right every time.
Oh, for
But I
sure.
think if we don't have these conversations, then we can't plan towards it because we know that these sorts of things are inevitable. And I think it's a really good conversation to go, okay, well, what could I do? How could I respond? So back to the conversation with my young adult who was in my house.
Yes.
And look, luckily I was able to go away and sort of go, okay, what's really going on here? What has happened to this person today that's caused them to erupt like that and take it out kind of on me
Yeah, yeah,
and say things they probably shouldn't have said. Um, but I was able to have that clarity in thinking at that time. So, and I think that's something, and that is something that certainly don't do it perfectly. But in life, I like to think that every person has their own battles. And when we show up in relationship, we're going to see their struggles and it's going to show up in a variety of ways. So with little children, it shows up in their
yeah,
behavior. And with teenagers, usually still their behavior.
yeah.
Even
And
as
in adults,
adults,
it's our behavior. So can I ask you a coaching question around that?
oh, maybe, yeah.
Uh, so, because I can sit here and assume that your choice to ask those questions, like what it gives you, by pausing and reflecting, okay, something's going on in their world, what's going on
Yeah.
in their world, but without me assuming that and without our listeners assuming that. So just to ask, so what do you gain by
Mm,
having that kind of pause and being able to
mm,
stop and reflect on that question? Like, what does that give you in that moment?
mm. Really good question. Um, the hurt that I was feeling instantly that came up as a reaction to what happened, by pausing for a moment and thinking about their world, I could see, even though I still felt a bit sensitive in my heart, I could
Yeah,
see for a moment that, hey, maybe this isn't about me and our relationship. This is
yeah.
actually about them and their day and where they're at. And so what does it give me? It gives me it well, even it helps me to love on that person still.
Oh, love that.
Do you
Yeah,
know? Because
yeah,
if you pause and think about their day for a moment and think, oh, maybe it was a really bad day.
Yeah.
you're leaning in towards that person, and you're being curious, and you're sort of drawn to them. So you feel a bit more drawn to them rather than feeling angry and whatever. So you're leaning in, and it softens the blow to the heart to some degree in that
Absolutely. Yeah.
instance, because you're going, oh, and the moment you're curious about something and you think about them and you shed a new light over it, it really, yeah, it softens all the words that were used, it softens the emotion. And yeah, that's what it would give me.
Yeah.
It softens my emotion, but it causes me to love and lean into them a bit more.
I love that because that just is a whole, it's a completely different energy, isn't it?
Yeah.
To if you're feeling angry and stabbed in the heart, and maybe rightfully so. It's not like,
Yeah,
you've got
100%.
all the reason to feel that way, but you
Yeah.
have a choice in that moment to choose to
Mm.
um escalate the hurt and the anger and the frustration or whatever,
Mm.
or you can choose in the moment to lean in, as you say, and get curious
Mm.
what's happening in their world. I wonder what's going on. And
Yeah.
that just changes everything about
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah. And I think it takes away too, like, the sort of wanting to hold a grudge. Like, I know if I've had a
Yeah.
fight with somebody, right, sometimes, and you kind of want to hang on to it and, keep that with you for a little bit. But the moment you lean in towards them and get curious about them, that sort of desire, that human fleshy part of wanting to hold the grudge
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
softens as well, because it really wasn't about us and our relationship, and it had absolutely nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
And I think it would be naive of me to think that you can just have a relationship like that and never talk about it at a later date.
Yeah.
It would be very, very smart of me then to have that conversation later. Hey, when that happened, this is how I felt. This is what
Love
was
that.
going
Yeah.
on. But absolutely not in the moment. That would not have been helpful.
And me just listening to you share that, I mean, I love you saying that. And I think if I reflect back in my own world, I've probably way too often thought in my head it would be a good idea to go back and have that conversation, but
And then
then
not.
just not. It's kind of like, oh, you know what, it's easier just to forget about it, like
Mm.
sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
And I think that's a moment missed because
Yeah.
then next time around, this same person has another bad day.
Yeah.
It could sort of create this pattern that's really
Yeah.
unhelpful. And
And
so part of you
unhealthy.
protecting, yeah, so hard part of
Mm.
you protecting your heart
Mm.
is by at a later stage when everyone is in a better frame of mind and not so triggered
Yeah.
to saying, hey, that actually wasn't okay.
Mm.
But I
Yeah.
think that takes courage.
Yeah. And then
That,
the
yeah.
the willingness to maybe open up another uncomfortable conversation, because it might
Yes.
not go how we, because I remember doing that one time to one of my kids when they were a bit younger and having that conversation, but they still weren't really, they still got their back up and were still quite defensive. And so there is a risk of unleashing further conversation, which could still be hurtful.
Yeah. 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 And it's a kind of a dance we do, isn't it?
Mm.
Because I think the challenge with these kinds of relationships and those we genuinely love and are dear to us,
Yeah.
it's because we love so deeply and they are so dear to us, and vice versa. They probably
Mm.
love us and we're so dear to them that it feels so triggering.
Yeah.
Because I know one thing that taught us in the coaching space is, one of the values of having a conversation with a coach that's not somebody that's in your world is that the moment you're talking to somebody that's a bit more removed and out of your world, and you
Mm.
don't have that sort of heart connection with, it's much easier to say things and unpack things without feeling judged.
Yeah.
But when it's somebody so close to your world, it's so easy to feel judged and to
Mm-hmm.
feel unheard or misinterpreted, or yes, I don't know, it's almost like the it's a much more sort of charged conversation
Yes.
than with someone outside of your world.
Yeah. Like, if another random person had come into my house and behaved the way my person did last week, I'd be just like, what? That doesn't even make sense. Like, it wouldn't have
Yes,
affected my heart at all. I just think this
yes,
person was being ridiculous. But because it was someone I cared for, it absolutely impacted my heart immediately.
Yeah.
And you're right, we're sort of highly charged kind of relationships because there is a lot of emotion in there. And we have a lot of
Yeah.
care towards, the people we love. They do as well. And I think we was sort of head in the direction to say that it's not about not feeling the hurt, because when you're
Yes.
part of a family, we're going to feel hurt. But it's how do we then, what do we do with that? How do we not, what was the question from your email about how does it impact our self-worth? So we can
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
hurt, right? And we can take it on. And then, let's go back to your example of your kid wanting to go. Well, he didn't even say he wanted to go live with the friend's mum. That
No,
was your
just what I was
judgment and
hearing. Yeah,
realizing,
it was my judgment, and what I was
yeah,
hearing was that, oh, this mum, other mum is, you
obviously
know,
better than you.
yeah. Thanks for finishing that sentence for me. I was struggling to even get the words out.
Yeah. So in that space there, that could easily impact our self-worth, right? As mums,
Yes.
if our kids, if we're feeling that that's what they're meaning, then we can start to take on in that hurt. We then can start having the thoughts. And I think it's the thoughts that start to impact our self-worth. So our thoughts will be, oh, that mum must be better than me. They have this, that, and the other. And you start to compare and start to think all those thoughts and start to beat yourself up about, the type of mum that you are. So then before we know it, our self-worth is impacted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we,
So I love what you shared earlier about, so I think this conversation is about, like this stuff is going to happen. It's
yeah,
part of, being real and being loved by
being part of the
family and
human
loving others,
race.
but
Yes.
it's how do we, so we've got the choice to not have these conversations and not
Mm-hmm.
figure out a plan.
Yeah.
As you said, we might not get it right every time, but at
Yeah.
least having the thinking of, well, there is a plan that I could think about
Mm.
at least.
Yes.
I can at least have the thoughts of, well, in if when that happens next time, who
Give
do I
this a
want to
crack.
be?
Yeah.
How do I want to be? Because I think for so long, I just didn't have the awareness to ask those kinds of questions. And it was
Mm.
just like, well, of course I'm going to be triggered because that's life,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So I think just even the awareness that we can actually stop and pause and have a think about how we're being in those moments,
Mm.
and that we actually
Mm.
have way more choice than we often realize we do
Yeah, we
to
do.
choose to be. I loved your language, lean into the love and
Mm.
lean into being curious about what happens, what's happening in their world.
Mm.
And to realize that I think, hand on heart, I can probably say that almost all the time somebody lashes out at you, it's got to do with what's happening in their world and
Yeah.
not, you're
Not
just
you.
you're
Mm.
just in the firing line. And unfortunately, often it's our loved ones that we fire things at
Yeah.
most easily.
Yeah.
They kind of see the best of us and they see the worst of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the honor of living and being part of a family. Like, you'd even rather that, right? I'd rather, when the kids were growing up, I think, oh, they're so naughty and rude to me at times, and yet they go out and they're these perfect little angels. But you'd much rather
Yeah.
that, right? Because they're learning how to be in the world. But they
Yeah.
can't be, none of us can be perfect and get it right all of the time. But that question that you used before, and we've used it a couple of times already today, that is, how do I want to be?
Yeah.
How do I want to be, and who do I want to be?
In
Like,
that moment. Yeah.
in that moment, in this, whether it's maybe a season, who do you want to be? And it takes courage to think about that. And
Yeah.
because we don't often, I mean, there's probably lots of movies and examples, but we often see the fiery exchanges. And that's what we see on the
Yeah,
news and
and
we
we
see in the
often feel
movies.
justified that,
Mm.
it's our, of course we should lash out when we're angry, or of course we should, it's this whole, because it's counterintuitive to lean into love in those moments,
Mm.
or to, and when you're saying, well, who do I want to be? Well, it's I want to be someone who is non-react or doesn't react as easily
Yeah.
or as quickly, or yes, feels angry or hurt because we care,
Mm.
but then is able to still have the courage enough to lean in and be curious and choose to go against, I suppose, the norm and
And the
cultural norms
natural.
of,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's we spend a lot of time in our different podcast episodes talking about our thoughts. It has a lot to do with then our thought process. And if we're constantly working on our thought process and we're not allowing us to, ruminate, that's a word that you've used a few
Yes.
times, and let it, because I mean, who knows that when someone says something hurtful, if we hear that and we feel like it's gone straight to the heart and then we ruminate on that thought, it's just going to make the heart it's going to be even more difficult for us to process and work through. So I
Oh,
think
for sure.
our thought process then around that is, okay, if we're working on our thoughts, we don't want to be people who ruminate. What do we do here? How do we go from, all right, I feel hurt, I could be justifying it and thinking about it over and over again and going spiraling down, or perhaps choose a different way of thinking to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, if you're listening, I think our take home today, if you take away anything today, it's
Mm,
just, what if you knew that when someone says something hurtful to you,
mm,
that you have a choice?
mm.
Even that, like, what if you knew that, yes, your default or your most human reaction to it might be to feel hurt and feel
Yeah,
like the wind's just been taken right out of your sails, or to just feel like your self-worth has been knocked. And we're not saying that's wrong
no.
at all, but it's like, what if you knew that it's also possible to lean into love in those moments when it's
Mm,
so counterintuitive and it's so not what you're, because that's the whole difference between like a knee-jerk reaction
yeah,
and choosing a response to something.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so if your big takeaway today is, oh, actually, there is a choice to respond differently,
yeah.
I think that's a great place to start.
Takeaway, yeah. And we
And
have
then
a
your next
response all
question
the
is,
time.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And then the question is, well, in that response, what do I want that response to look
to
like?
look
Who
like.
do I want to be and how do I want to be in that response? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're big questions.
There are big questions, Al, but I think, the start of this whole journey to becoming more of who we want to become is to ask these questions,
Mm,
because I think we've been created incredibly, I mean, it just blows my mind how we've been created, and our
yeah,
minds are just phenomenal. And when we ask these questions, that's when we start figuring out the answers, and you
yeah,
can ask these questions now, but it's when you're driving in your car next week, or when you're out on a run next week, or when someone says something hurtful in 2 weeks' time, or when you
yeah,
wake up from a dream or something. It's amazing when these answers appear
yeah,
when you ask the right questions. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I guess to walk away with those thoughts, because we do want to be people that respond and not react in
Mm,
every situation in life, really, don't we? Um,
yeah. But thanks for
hmm.
sharing your incident and sharing your amazing
Slightly
wisdom with how
amusing.
you yeah, but I just think it's awesome how you responded in that moment. You didn't react. You
Mm.
chose to not say anything, where I probably would have just like, wow.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you yeah, you've given me lots to think about. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks for letting me bring that to the table and helping us to think about who we want to be in life and the choices. Again, like we say this all the time, we always have a choice.
Yeah.
And what a great reminder, we always have a choice in the way we respond, even when we're feeling hurt, we've always got a choice. So thanks for the chat today, Kat. And
Oh, it's been great.
yeah, and I look forward to doing it all again in a week's
Next week.
time.
Yeah.
All
Super.
right,
See you then,
pleasure.
Al.
Bye.
Cheers.